Alrighty, good morning everyone and welcome to another Security Compass webinar. Today's webinar topic is building a security culture. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Raquel Rodriguez, the events manager here at Security Compass and your host for today's webinar. Before we get started with today's webinar, I'd like to just give you a quick overview of Security Compass. For those of you who may not be aware of us until today, Security Compass was founded in 2004 and began with a team of experienced penetration testers. Today, we have come far and work with many large enterprises globally to manage their cybersecurity risk through balanced development automation. We have three key offerings. Our flagship product, SD Elements, enables organizations to deliver software quickly and reduce costs through automation. Our modular role-based e-learning solutions empower organizations to embrace DevSecOps, and our strategic advisory services offer expertise in cloud security, pen testing, and red teaming for a better security posture. Now let's quickly go through some housekeeping items. As you may have noticed, you've all entered this session on mute to reduce background noise. Second, a recording of this webinar will be available after today's event. You'll receive an email with a link to this recording. We will also be publishing this recording in the resources section of our website. Also, we encourage everyone to raise questions. Please do submit your questions into the chat and we'll answer them during the Q&A session. Lastly, if you'd like to follow up with us or if you have a topic you'd like to see covered in a future webinar, please email us at contact@securitycompass.com. Like I mentioned, today's webinar topic is building a security culture. And I'm pleased to have here with me today, Spencer Koch, security wizard at Reddit, struggle there, John Martin, security thought leader, Ihan Tech, VP of InfoSec at Cyber Electra, and Altez Villani, Director of Insights Research at Security Compass. Thank you all for being here with me today. I know our audience is keen to hear your presentation, so I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thanks a lot, Raquel. Appreciate that. And folks, feel free as we're going through the conversation today, if you've got any comments, any questions, any thoughts, put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Let's make this two-way. And the topic that we're going to talk about really is super important. We were having a discussion just prior to getting on this webinar today. There are so many different aspects to consider, and we've only got an hour for us to try and tackle some of the key issues here. So let me just quickly bring up a whiteboard here, and what we'll do is let's start to get the ball rolling on this whole idea of building this security culture. So what I'd like to do is kind of ground this conversation. When we talk about culture, it's something that's very vague. People have some idea of what it is, but they're not really sure what we mean when we talk about it. And I think before we even start to talk about building a security culture, it's important to define what we mean by this idea of a culture. Now, normally, when we talk about culture, we look at things like values. And it's the concept of these values that ultimately help us drive certain key behaviors that we're looking for. And in the context of security, in the context of DevOps, our idea is the values that we have drive these certain behaviors. And we're hoping that the behaviors align with the whole notion of developing things securely and making sure that security is a priority. But let me just pause there for a moment and let's invite our panelists now into this discussion. So I'll start with you, John. Why don't we take a look? Can you talk a little bit, first of all, about values? You know, we have organizational values, personal values. What do we mean by values? What are your thoughts?
So when we talk about values in the corporate sense, right, in the company sense, we're really talking about how a person behaves at work. But values, I think, are a lot deeper than that. It's what people do at home. It's what they do in the car. It's, you know, what they do at the grocery store. The values are an expression of their beliefs, of their persona, of all of those things. And they play out in how the person behaves at work, in their work group, in their team, and in the way they support the company's goals and behaviors. So when we talk about building a security culture, we've got to be able to work on those values because that's what's going to be changing our behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Spencer, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think to echo what John's saying, a lot of the it's hard to change some of those values, and a lot of it's based on historical context. So every org is going to have their own set of problems with dealing with doing kind of a values or behavioral changes, because you could be in a place that has it's a younger staff, it's a startup, you don't have the legacy tech debt of values where you've had people with bad experiences around security, or they have a preconceived notion of like this is how things should be done. So there's quite a large spectrum, and unfortunately, each scenario, each company is going to have its own unique snowflake of how do you modify, how do you shape those values to inject kind of a security mentality around it.
Interesting. And Ihan, you're currently on mute, but do you have some thoughts on this that you can inject as well?
Yeah, absolutely. The security culture is as critical to the security, just as the culture is crucial to the organizational tasks, right? And information security culture provides a guide and structure to the human behavior so that the risky actions to the organizational assets can be avoided, right? As you mentioned, this is kind of extremely important because it encourages the employees to make decisions and fulfill their day-to-day duties in alignment with the organization's kind of just the policies over there.
Interesting. And so as we look at kind of our day-to-day duties, that's kind of where I want to dive in a little bit now into when we've got this historical context and an expression of certain beliefs. When we look at in a very concrete way, an organization generally, what they value, yes, they want to make sure that they are contributing towards the greater good of society. But at the same time, they're trying to balance this against the need to generate revenue, to manage their costs. And when we take a look at security, the angle that comes in is how do we make sure that we are behaving as an organization in a way that is responsible and we're not taking on undue risk, but we are in fact doing what is best for our shareholders, for the stakeholders involved in this, and for society at large, so to speak. And I think, bringing all of these different perspectives into it, we need to be able to ultimately codify the stuff. And we'll talk a little bit later about how we can do this. But right now, let's just keep the conversation to this notion of what we mean by a culture, right? So we've got these values and we've got these kinds of behaviors that we're trying to bring in here. And when we talk about these expressions and these beliefs, who ultimately should be looking at things like values of a company? Right? Where does this actually, is there somebody that is accountable or somebody that is responsible for kind of managing this within a company? Spencer, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the cliche answer would be the tone at the top, right? So you would expect your leadership to be setting the framework for how that company is going to behave. And ultimately, they should be driving where you place value, how you're going to set up a belief system. I know, at Reddit, we've gone through multiple iterations, and it's always something that is set by an exec board level perspective and then drilled down into the organization. And it's, I think a lot of companies will do that. I think the interesting manifestation of that is then to have OKRs, to have objectives actually line up to those values. Some companies do a really good job of that. Some people are just like, oh yeah, we got the values over there on that poster, and that's all we got, so we're set. So it really, when you have an organization that aligns the activities they are taking themselves to those values, that definitely makes our job a lot easier.
John, your thoughts on this? Who do you think is responsible ultimately?
So I got to tell you, just to take a step back on this. I think that most companies are inherently sociopathic, and they have to be in order to survive. I mean, we say that, and it has all of these horrible connotations, but they have to be in order to survive. The reality is, so it becomes a question of how do we get accountability built into that, and how do we then now manage the behaviors of the people to lead to a less toxic company, right? And we do that through training. We do that through metrics. We do that through a number of sort of standardized methods. I think a great thing to be talking to is how do we do those training? How does metrics drive that training? Because I think ultimately that's what that learning reinforces behaviors, feeds back into values, and that decreases the negative aspects of that sociopathic behavior that corporate tends to have.
Mm-hmm. And so therein lies the ability to go in there and impact the culture. Sometimes as an organization transitions, like we've for so long talked about DevOps and let's get this thing out as quickly as possible. But the minute we try to inject, security into that, it's like, square peg in a round hole in many cases, right? But if we rethink this and we look at the metrics, the OKRs, the training, the learning, and how that might in turn go in there and impact that culture, to think about security actually as an enabler. It's a reset of the mind to just think about this in a slightly different way. So we're all trying to kind of work together. So we're jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit, but let me afford.
Yeah.
Go ahead, John. You got thoughts?
I just think it's also, it's the spider web metaphor. It's all connected. It's all part of the same thing. And there's good and there's bad around the spider web.
Yeah.
It's just, we can't look at behavior in isolation without looking at the fundamentals of the business culture. And the business culture is made up of leadership decisions that trickle down into how everybody does things. Mm-hmm. Spencer, you're absolutely right.
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 Yeah. Hi, Han.
Yeah, thank you. I do agree. I mean, kind of just, but I have a bit kind of just a different opinion on that, right?
Good.
Getting everyone involved in cultural transformation is the first step, right? And who should own this? This is a kind of just an interesting question and difficult question. And you like asking difficult questions, Altas. Since an organization's culture reflects the deep-seated beliefs and assumptions held by its members, you cannot, unfortunately, simply dictate that everyone will now believe something different, or even what the new beliefs should be based upon, right? So any cultural transformation is highly unlikely to succeed unless the process is deliberately inclusive. Since everyone in an organization helps to create and also transmit the culture, so everyone has to have a stake in the building, changing, and also the maintaining the security culture of us. It's not only kind of just the executive team, but everyone should play an important role over there.
That's really interesting. So Ayhan, I'm gonna pick on that a little bit. Let's go now. Let's assume that we've got this ideal of, everybody's involved. There's an intentionality, and this is really important, right? Culture is not something that just happens. You have to plan it. You have to manage it. You have to make sure that you feed it, right? And it's an ongoing thing. What are some of the things in terms of behavior that we see with a culture that is focused on security? So some of the things we've talked about here, there's a mentality around managing risk. There's an accountability that people feel, that this is something that, I'm accountable to ensure that the work that I do adheres to good, sound security principles. What are some of the other behaviors around a team that has bought in to security? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, that there are a lot, but the most important things for me is the communication, the collaboration, and also the education. These are paramount in fostering a strong security culture, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Because the development of the security knowledge and skills, if they are provided and there is a support for staff development in relation to the security knowledge, then this makes a huge difference, right? And there are also, when we look at the kind of just the organizations that have the strong security culture, we see that there are ongoing dialogues with the workforce so that they can tap into their ways of working and also thresh out the difficult process and procedure points and pressure points as well over there, right? Mm-hmm. And the collaboration is, of course, it is a must because Altas, this is enabling the organizations to find the misalignments between real working practices and also the business goals that the organization sets. It encourages creative working practices that have the potential to kind of just transform the security. And working together and inclusion can only strengthen the security. And these are the kind of the most important traits that we see in the organizations that have the strong security capabilities.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So we have a comment that came in, and this is from Tony. It's good to see you here, Tony. So it's interesting that his point of view is that culture actually just does happen, in fact, for almost every organization, and has happened. So to have a culture which values security, on the other hand, doesn't just happen. So the points being made are very applicable, right? So if we react to it, there will be a culture forming, but it may just not be what we're looking for. It's good to see you here, Tony, by the way. So please feel free, folks, if you want to add some additional thoughts and comments. This is a community effort. Let's help each other out, as we go forward with this. So let me flip over to you, John, your thoughts on day-to-day behaviors for a team that has bought into this idea of security as part of their culture.
Yeah, so I think Ian really talked about some of the sort of high-level day-to-day behaviors: ongoing dialogue, collaboration, comms, education. All of those things are absolutely on point. I think that when we start talking about accountability, though, we need to have greater accountability in these teams. Certainly in the teams that I've led in this space, having that accountability, daily accountability, is huge. And there's a number of ways to promote that, right? That teaming aspect, the meetings, and sort of the metrics we collect for to drive some of that accountability, drive some of those behaviors. There's, in the day-to-day working team, it's absolutely important that we eliminate sort of we tend as geeks, we tend to be a little bit negative in some of the ways that we communicate. Just saying. And that really can affect the overall team. And so when we start talking about communications and ongoing dialogues, we have to have a way to make those absolutely functional discussions, rather than pushing off into the unnecessary sort of dialogue that we often get into.
So you mentioned
that's from a day-to-day perspective, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned we tend to talk sort of in the negative. What are some examples, concrete examples, like naysayers getting in the way, blocking stuff? What are you thinking?
Oh, so a great example. I took over one organization that had been there for a long time, and they developed, bless their hearts, they developed their own methods and tools, and they'd just been isolated from the rest of the organization, rest of the company, for 8 years, 9 years. And their way of looking at the rest of the company, they were everything they did, they believed was golden, and everything the company did was, by definition, not so golden, right? We've all run into this. So how do we transform, without just firing everybody and starting fresh, how do we transform that into a good, clear, clean working group, right? We apply some lean principles, right? We say, okay, well, in order to do these things that you're trying to accomplish, in order to do these sort of pen test activities that you're doing, right? How do we make that more acceptable to the rest of the organization? Right? And they came up with the ideas on how to make that lean. They came up with the ideas on how to improve all of those things. But they couldn't do that until they understood what the issues were. Right? So I think that communication on a real positive sort of note is absolutely huge. We've got to have those functional discussions.
Yeah, we're here to help you. We're here to enable you, rather than, you come to me and I'm going to tell you what's not good. Yeah. There's a problem there, right?
Yeah, so that's a problem. And I'll tell you, if If I'm going in there and telling them what's not good, that's a management issue. That's on me, right?
Interesting. Spencer, your thoughts? Day to day, what does this look like?
Yeah, I mean, like, I love what John was saying around it, because it's almost like an us versus them mentality, which from a security standpoint has definitely existed for a long time. And so trying to get away from its security versus everybody else, moving more towards collaborative. We talked a little bit before the webcast was around respect. Like, that's the biggest thing that I can think of, is having respect for an existing team's processes, an existing team's culture, the way that they conduct themselves. If we come in and start saying, well, we want to do all these things differently, and your code is really ugly, and all of these negative things, then yeah, that's not gonna go over well.
Not gonna go well.
So having respect and that empathy for other teams, to understand how they are living their life in their shoes, and also to get them to understand how we are living our lives in our very risky, stressful, like the sky is coming down world of security. Being able to share that empathetic relationship and find a common understanding is super hard, but that's like the definition of a really good security culture, is when everybody just gets it. Like, we understand, we don't see security as this other thing. Like, security is just quality, and everybody wants to have a really quality product, a really quality service. So when you're not making that artificial abstraction layer where here's security over here doing security stuff, when it's just quality and, like, let's talk about risk and making sure that the company's still going to be here in, a year, 5 years, 10 years, that helps kind of level the playing field, and everybody can get on board with that type of discussion around culture and values.
Interesting. So now, we've talked about, spent a bit of time talking about values, how it drives behaviors. We've even talked about specific examples of values, specific examples of behaviors. Now, I'm going to put myself in the mind of a strategist or a program manager, let's say. So I know what my culture is like today, and I see this list, right? There's a panel here today that's put up this list and said, okay, if we're going to drive certain behaviors that are really focused on security, it's a culture that focuses on managing risk. There's accountability. It's concentrated on business goals. It's integrated with the rest of the company. It's focused on security really being an inherent part of the quality. Sounds really good. My question is, what are the specific activities I now need to do to help me get from where I am today to where I need to go? Give me actionable guidance, some kind of an on-ramp, some kind of a roadmap that tells me, okay, first of all, do this. Then second, do this. And I'm going to start it off with you, John. Your thoughts?
So I'm just going to go back to things we've done. Okay, just for a second. It's helpful to have sort of an agreed upon problem statement. In other words, a problem statement that's backed by metrics, right? Backed by facts. We've got, for an example of that would be, we had 1,300 and some PCERT activities, product security incident response, last year. And we absolutely must drive that down to 12, right? How do we make that quantum leap? And so we've got a problem statement. Now everybody starts looking at that problem statement and says, okay, well, let's devolve that into its components. Let's devolve that into actionable solutions. We start getting everybody on board. We start getting meaningful dialogue on how to solve some of the fundamental, business actions, right? How do we eliminate that rework? Because every time we got a defect, every time we got a problem, every time, and PCERT is just the symptom of rework, needed. And so if we've got this high level thing happening, how do we fix that? And so I agree. I think that the first step is having a common awareness of what at least one of the problems are. We can use that to drive a whole lot of other things, a whole lot of other sort of corporate goals, if we will. But we can start with that simple problem and let everybody else in the teams start to suggest things that are going to be happening.
Yeah. So what do we do? What do we do here, John? We get like the whole company gets together and it's like, okay, who's got a problem? And it's like all hands go up, and why do we manage this? Talk to me. Talk to us.
So I'll tell you my very favorite, and some of my peers over at SafeCode are doing some great work on this, much better than I was doing over at Boeing at the time. These guys are doing some great work on driving the security champions concept throughout the enterprise, right? So you've got a white belt security champion that's a corporate admin over in marketing, and they're taking all of these security ideas and bringing them into that marketing purview as an admin, right? And so we get this ground up sort of security awareness that I think is brilliant. And then we've got the different belt levels that sort of feed into quality. And so we've got security champion architects, IT architects, got security champion coders, we got security champion, aircraft designers, or whatever, right?
So in each of these domains, we're essentially, we're trying to propagate these security practices, and you need somebody that can kind of bridge the gap, right?
And the Champions program is a great vehicle for that. Plus, it's a cool word, right?
Okay, so we go in, we agree on the problem, we identify the business actions that need to be done to try to avoid this rework. So Spencer, let me just flip over to you for a moment, just to kind of kickstart the conversation initially as an on-ramp to trying to solve some of these problems. What are your thoughts? Do you first look for the problem, look for the data sets that help us to understand what the problem is, and then identify what we want to solve? Anything missing here? Anything different?
No, I think that's that's 101 for defining a program, is understanding what's the problem to be solved. And that gives you a really good litmus test of how much does management want to bite off, right? To say we're going to decrease the number of defects that we have around security, that's manageable. And you can tell like the volume of defects. If you're going to go from, I've got 1,300 to use John's example, to 0, that's a way different level of effort than you're going to have from 13 to 12. Right?
Yeah.
Like that really is going to tell you how much that organization is going to bite off. And it also gives you a good idea of how much the execs thinks, from an executive perspective, they think the org is ready to change. And as security people, like we probably are not the best plugged into that understanding of like how quickly can the org adapt to that change, because change is hard. People, humans hate change. That you have to know how to be able to handle that. And so if you come in with this massive org plan of we're going to do all these trainings and security champion programs, and we're going to start having ride-alongs, like peer review sessions with security engineers, like that's going to probably scare the crap out of a lot of people. So understanding how much you want to bite off, to then come up with actionable plans on that makes a whole lot of sense.
So making sure we've got the right scope, and then kind of moving forward from there. So it's not trying to do everything, but incrementally, maybe in 3 phases or something. This is kind of, what we think is achievable, because eventually this is going to come down, as we get later on. There's going to have to be some assessment to try and see what is it going to take to actually implement this stuff. Ayhan, your thoughts? You had a great point earlier that, this security is, or at least building a culture, is ultimately everybody's responsibility. Just to try and initially kickstart this conversation, does it make sense? Let's go in, let's look at the data, let's find out where our problems are. Is any other sort of thoughts from your side?
Absolutely. If you don't know where the harbor is, no wind is a good wind, Altas. Yes, you need to understand where you are first, so that you can kind of sort of define where you're going to go. And as John mentioned, the building a security culture is challenging. And unfortunately, there is no standard way of doing this, right? Because each organization is different. But there are some kind of just sort of things that the organizations can do to achieve this, right? And we did discuss the getting everyone involved in cultural transformation, and we kind of just sort of defined that is the first step, right? And then organizations need to kind of just position the security function appropriately in the organizational structure, right? Today, I see lots of kind of just organizations that they did not put the information security into the right place in the organizational chart, right? Establishing information security leadership in the organizational structure that makes sense for the organization, such as, for example, that the CISO should be reporting to the CEO, as opposed to kind of just, some other unrelated departments, right? So you need to make sure your heads of security are on equal footing with the heads of the technology or the other kinds of folks over there, so that you can show your sincerity that you are taking seriously the security seriously over there, right? And once you do this, if you are serious about this kind of changing the culture or building the culture, then you have to educate. And again, I think John kind of just mentioned this, because education is important to build a strong security culture. However, I see lots of kind of mistakes over there as well. If it is provided that the security is provided with a compliance concern, then education itself may not be as effective as it should be, right? Rather than relying on sending out the awareness messages or kind of just the boring mandatory trainings, perhaps the best way to engage employees is to demonstrate them a direct correlation between their behavior and its impact on the business, right? So you need to educate the employees on the benefits to them and demonstrate the security behaviors. For example, what are the positive benefits in relation to their role, right? What are the possible negative consequences or penalties for them if they don't adopt the behaviors? They need to kind of just to be, trained on those as well, right? And yeah, we are training, but we have to empower them as well with the right tools and process as well, right? For example, I know lots of organizations that they don't know how to report to the security incident or security concern, right? And organizations need to improve the reporting security concerns and encourage people to report incidents, right? So in order to kind of accomplish this, it is important to have a well understood, easy to use reporting mechanism for security concerns and incidents, right? And what else can be done? You have to kind of just make your security policies very clear, crispy clear, right? Because security policy, when you look at an organization, is a cornerstone of the security culture, because it is the kind of just the only, well, this is not maybe the only, but it guides the employee behavior over there, right? So executive leadership here should formalize risk appetite. Again, I see lots of organizations when you ask what is risky behavior or what is not, you cannot get a clear answer, right? So because you don't have the kind of the risk appetite kind of clearly identified and expressed in policy. So, and once you do this one, it must be regularly communicated across the organization as well, Alta, so that the staff need to understand it, buy into it, and of course, consistently act on it, right? There are, again, lots of things that can be done. One of the kind of just my favorite is some of the organizations that I observe, they are ensuring that an employee's security performance is discussed at the performance appraisal times, right? And also they are not kind of just shy to punish poor security behaviors as well, right? Think about it. If there are no consequences for staff in following the security policy, then it will be very difficult to build a strong security culture over there, right? The employees should understand that they will be reprimanded if they don't obey the security rules, right? Yeah, this is pretty much kind of just the over highlights sections what we can do to kind of build the strong security culture.
Interesting. Let's Raquel, if we could throw up a poll. Let's do the first one out there. Let's talk about this idea of a strong security culture, and let's find out now. I think this is a good benchmark. Let's see what folks think about this. What do you think a strong security culture consists of? And we've spoken about many of these things already, but what are your thoughts on this? So we see, a lot of folks are still kind of responding here. We'll give it another, 10 or 15 seconds, and then we'll stop. And Raquel, if we could eventually show the results to everybody, I think it will be interesting to see what comes out of this. Okay, give it a couple more seconds. Okay, let's stop that and let's broadcast this, Raquel, if we can kind of show the results here. And this is kind of what came out. Regular communication and ownership of security at all levels kind of was at the top. And then we've got clear security policies and guidelines, and then responsibilities, roles and responsibilities. So there's a governance side to this, which is really important. And then support for challenging each other, being able to openly go in there and have a dialogue with folks. So Spencer, your thoughts on the results of this poll?
Yeah, I don't think it's too surprising. I think to what we were just talking about, like having the foundational security components, like a policy, those are things that if they weren't there, then that would be very questionable if you actually did have a security culture. But I think the things that kind of echo, and it seems, the thing that I enjoy is having seen security transform within the last 10 years from an us versus them mentality to now we're collaborative. The need for regular communication, awareness of risk being one of the highest, that gives me great hope that we're starting to round that bed and being partners with our engineering or with our product pieces of the org to actually help add value rather than just being, well, here's a punishment because you didn't follow this one security bug. Because sometimes like mistakes happen. Things occur, but it's our job should be, how can we help mitigate that? How can we reduce those frequencies? And that is making sure that you are aware of what is going on and making sure you know who's going to fix the stuff. That roles and responsibilities. Because I've been in plenty of orgs where security just putting in Jira tickets all day, every day, and nothing happens. Right? Until that actually becomes software engineers going and doing things, or OT specialists going and effecting change. Like, that is a sign of a security culture where you can put in something like almost treating it like a feature request, security as a feature request, and they actually get actioned. That to me is the tangible benefit of having a good security culture. And if you don't see that, then you likely don't have a very strong security culture.
Interesting. John, your thoughts on the poll?
John or Ian?
Yeah, John, you. Yeah. Any thoughts on this poll and the results?
Many thoughts. I had a mentor that once said, Mr. Martin, you got enough mouth for 2 sets of teeth. He's right. So I have many thoughts on this. So there are some dangers in how we think about what we do. And there are some evidentiary behaviors that happen. For example, if we are doing helicopter parenting as a security organization, we fly in, we parent a little bit, and we fly out, right? Well, that's a symptom of a dysfunctional organization. And almost everybody does it. That's a real problem. So regular communication and awareness of risks, that candid communication that says, hey, here's the problem space, right? And how we manage that is critical to our organizational survival. That's huge. Security policies, guidelines, procedures, those are driven really by 2 things. One's the compliance aspect of it. We've got to be HIPAA compliant. We've got to be, European standard. We've got to be, Asian standard. We've got all of these different things. So that's sort of one. The second is that our best policies are really best practices that we codified, right? Like we tell people you can't carry a gun on the campus. Well, that's because that's a best practice that's been codified as a policy, right? So we've really got those 2 drivers into the policies, and those drive down to some procedures. Ownership of security at all levels, absolutely right on. And again, I'm going to put out an unabashed pitch for security champions. I think that's one great way to drive that into an organization. Support for challenging each other. I've been bit by this one, personally bit by this one. I tried to create an environment where everybody was free to just say, anything constructive that they could, and it almost inevitably devolved into nitpicking, right? You should have really sanitized that. You should have really, done this other thing, and it's just, come on, guys. Let's be positive about this. So as I go down that list, I can't see anything that's wrong or untrue, but there's some caveats around that too that I think we need to be aware of. So,
So John, for this list that we've got so far, these are some concrete steps, not necessarily in this order, but we make sure that we agree on the problem. We identify specific actions, and even if we focus, for example, on lean, which is a great way to take this organizational wide, and then trying to look for ways to avoid a lot of that waste that's happening. We position security in the right way. We educate people, not just coming in, doing the stuff, leaving, not just focusing on compliance, but literally looking at training, teaching, coaching people to say, you know what, if we continue in this behavior, here's the impact ultimately to the business, in terms of the services, the products, the software that we are putting out to market. Empowering people with the right tools and the processes, formalizing the risk appetite, having performance measurement so that we can track, are people on track? Are they not on track? Do you see any other aspects of or areas that people need to think about when we're looking at, trying to create this culture? Because there's a gap, right? What else?
Yeah, I'd like to take this away from being a stepwise list. I'd like to take the numbers off of these because if we think about how all of this happens in the real world, it's a very dynamic thing.
Agreed.
We don't just educate someone. We don't send them to class for a week and expect them to be competent. That's not how the real world works, right? People are only going to absorb, those 4 to 5 key things that we want to train them on. And so if we send them to a week, they come home with just 4 or 5 nuggets of knowledge. We could have done that in 20 minutes. I'm a real believer in all of these things are a constant part of the continuum. We can't just get the right tools and call it a day. Got to understand why those tools are the right tools, and that means that we're now looking for the next better thing. We've got to have a clean way to communicate, and that includes reporting incidents. That includes identifying things that we're not doing right today that we should be doing right tomorrow. And that goes back to, the problem statement, right? The problem statement is a constantly evolving thing. And so I'm not a fan of creating a sort of a stepwise process to information quality.
Yeah,
I
interesting. Yeah, and I think that's what's evolved even in the discussion we've had today. It's in order to go in there and think about where we have to go, let's consider all of these levers that we can use. Now, which one of these is going to make the most sense for us to get us from A to B, and then from B to C, and we can gradually kind of evolve that. And I'd like to turn the discussion now a little bit to the how, the capabilities that we need to build, right? So we've talked about the culture, we've talked about the behaviors that are ideal, we've talked about how to create a ramp to go in there and help us to derive these behaviors. But I mean, the people that are going to be involved with this are going to need certain capabilities. And what are these specific capabilities? We've talked about some of them. Measurement OKRs, we've talked about training capabilities that we need, learning capabilities, policy generation capabilities. John, since you were the last to talk, I'm going to sort of, ask you at this point, in creating a program to help us evolve and continually, in fact, evolve our security culture, what are some of these core capabilities, and we may or may not have them in the organization, but what are these things that are essential to helping us continually move towards a security culture that is healthy?
I think the continuous ability to achieve drives even more success.
What do you mean, ability to achieve?
Right. So if I've got a group that's slinging code, right? They're, I don't know, integrating an SAP module or doing something like that.
Sure.
The goals there are very, very different than if I've got a sales and marketing organization that's standing up a new website to promote blah, 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 right? But the net results, the micro results for each, in concept anyway, need to be very, very similar. We need to have constant achievement, right? Things people can be proud of. I'm not going to buy into something unless I can be proud of it. I got to be able to like it.
Mm-hmm.
You're giving, you as the company, you're going to give me a whole bunch of goals that will make me a virtuous employee, and then you're just going to leave me hanging, right? That doesn't make sense. So give me some goals, give me some things that I can do, and recognize my achievements, right? Mm-hmm. Even if they're micro achievements. And I think that's the best way to get started. And it's one of the best ways to continue to roll the program, right? And some of those rewards don't necessarily need to be a certificate. I've got enough certificates on the walls here. Sometimes it's just a hey, we're going to have a little seminar. We'd like to invite you to be one of the participants in that.
Yeah, cool. And it's interesting, when we talk about goals, when we kind of talk about individual goals and then goals as an organization, there's an evolution where, we talked a little bit about this earlier, where it's all about like, let's go quickly and let's get things out to market. And we created a culture that focused on speed of that delivery. Now the goal is it's this idea here called security as well, or compliance or risk or whatever these other areas are. In fact, it's, a lot of these things, and it's starting to evolve. And the culture has been created to focus on just one of these things over time. And now we're having to get people to say, hold on a second, let's also think about this and think about this and think about this as well. So the idea of getting these goals, it's not just a single goal necessarily. It may be a balance of multiple goals, which in fact is right for the company at this point in time, right? Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting point, John. So Ayhan, do you have some thoughts on capabilities as well that you think would help?
Yeah, I always recommend 3 magical C's. These are communication, consideration, and care, Altas. Mm-hmm. Because communication opens the doors between us. Consideration allows us to pass through those doors. And our ability to care each other unites us, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why we did discuss a lot about the importance of the communication, and the audience kind of just is validating this as well over there, right? Mm-hmm. And Altas, also you mentioned, it is true that information security is being perceived as an inhibitor as opposed to an enabler for the most of the organizations, right? So a security-oriented culture that has the consideration, the kind of just the ingredient that I mentioned, it is helping others to realize that security is actually a positive enabler of the company's initiatives, right? This allows organizations to reimagine information security as an enabling function, supporting and adding value to the business, right? And also we did kind of just to talk about the care for each other, right? The strong security culture also helps organizations consider new business models that capitalize on security as a differentiator of the products or services that the organization offer, right? So instead of viewing cybersecurity in terms of the risk, that the business will approach cybersecurity as a business enabler if you can kind of just provide these 3 magical C's: communication, consideration, and care.
Interesting. I'd like us to throw up the second poll that we've got there, Raquel, because we're now starting to get into this idea of aligning security with the sort of these business needs and goal-driven ideas. Do we think that a strong security culture, in fact, is going to slow us down? What do folks think about this? Many times when we end up with these conversations, it's, to your point, Ayhan, security is perceived as an inhibitor. And there's a problem here, right? If it is an inhibitor, this is people really do think this is the case. Why have we put ourselves in this position? What can we do to help us get past this kind of a gap that exists? And it'll be interesting to see, what people have to say. So Raquel, if you can just kind of broadcast the poll here, and let's see, so we've got, almost a third of people think that, yes, security culture, in fact, slows our teams down here. Spencer, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you know, that we talked about goals, we talked about innovation, we talked about something we didn't mention one thing that I really do love, and it's workflows that matter. So figuring out how security can get embedded into the existing flows that are already in place. And when we start saying, like, I want to do my own security thing, like, we're going to review all of the architecture things that come down the pipe, or we're going to test everything before it goes out to production. Those are ways that, yeah, that you're going to be the 30% on here that says a strong security culture, which is doing those activities, slows down the business. Because those are very high friction type of workflows. But if we're engaged with our engineering orgs to streamline, to figure out how we can add in security guardrails, security oversight, just a little sprinkling of security into those workflows, then we can help make that product better without having to slow down. And you know, sometimes, like going back to the Lean example, sometimes when we try things within the workflows, they don't work. So we as security being able to iterate and just completely, you know, if some tool or some approach does not work at all, scrap it. If it's too cumbersome and induces too much friction, figure out another way to meet that control, because there's almost always a different way to achieve a security control objective. Maybe you just need to think outside the box and pick a different tact, or change your approach to how you're doing the training, how you're doing testing, etc. But you know, to say security is a org that slows things down, I would ask, like, well, is QA, the quality team, seen in that same light? Because security is just really kind of the QA, but specialized within security. So if people don't value QA, then, well, that's a problem. First of all, that you've got bigger problems. That security is just a specialized flavor of QA.
Interesting.
And so for me, it's making sure that is, like, if that friction exists, you got to reduce that friction, and then you'll be successful. And you just got to be able to iterate and be able to listen to the feedback from the org.
Yeah, interesting. I want to quickly jump in. I do want to give credit to our attendees here, because there have been a couple of comments that have come in. One comment, I love Ihan's point about using security as a business enabler versus simply a compliance function that inhibits the business. So there's an innovation angle to this. And, you know, I sense another webinar on this topic. How can security actually enable innovation, right? There is a way to do this. And it's just as with any other disruptive element, right? You take a look at cloud or mobile or whatever. There are ways to offer new services or enhance existing services, which in fact help to make the organization more competitive. So there is an angle which you can bring this stuff in, but it's getting people accustomed to the fact that we're in this together. It's not, as John was referring to, as this sort of helicopter parenting. You come in and it's like, don't do this, don't do that. And then we're out of there. And it's like, okay, now what am I supposed to do with this feedback that you've given me, this long list of stuff, for example? And there's a second comment that came in as well. If security is perceived as an inhibitor, then the security implementation is probably not done correctly. Security should be seamless. So Spencer, you know, you were mentioning that security is in fact a part of quality. And if it's operating correctly, then it should be just a part of doing software development. And this is where we are today, right? It's not a separate line item in the budget. We don't have to go out there and talk about this as though it's something distinct or separate from everything else, but in fact is a key part of what we do. And even in some of the working groups that I'm involved with, it's interesting to see how this is becoming a key part of that discussion. We've got really looking at, on the one hand, security enabling the business, but at the same time, helping the business manage the risk. And it's, again, getting to what John was talking about with all these goals that are coming in. The goals that we had historically may have been focused on quick delivery. Let's get it out there. And not saying that this is wrong. If you're a small company, you know, you don't have time. You got to get something out there. But as you start to mature, then at some point, you're going to have to start to think about security and building this in. And what is the risk of doing this and getting it out and then having to mitigate against it? Right? And that starts to get into a whole risk discussion on how we can assess this over time. So I'm just going to sort of pause here at this point. We've only got about 5 minutes left and time just essentially flew by. But I'd like to kind of hand it over to Raquel to talk a little bit about some questions. Raquel, Q&A, anything. Maybe we can kind of dialogue that between us at this point. Thanks.
No problem. Well, thank you so much again. That was a great webinar. At this point, like Altaz mentioned, we would like to open it up to questions. So if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions yet, please do so now through the Q&A chat. The first question that we have here is, after successfully building a strong security culture, what are some of the ways it can unravel?
Unravel. John, your thoughts. I did it all. Come on.
Yeah. What can possibly go wrong? So I'll tell you that just in my experience, the number one unraveler, that's a great term. The number one unraveler is awfulizing. Just to keep with the theme of unraveler, we're going to be awfulizing today. Here's all the things that can go wrong. Here's why it's never going to work. And my dog doesn't love me today. I don't know. I just see so many organizations devolve into awfulizing.
Mm-hmm. Right? Why this won't work.
Yeah. And instead of getting on with good, practical, moving forward, let's get some real goals. Let's move these stuff forward in a really cool way. We tend to, and maybe it's human nature, I don't know, but we tend to devolve into awfulizing. So I'm going to toss that out as the new term.
Gotcha. Real quick, Ayhan, any thoughts on this? What could potentially go wrong? Your thoughts?
Again, due to kind of just a lack of communication over there, anything can go wrong over there. Altaz, this is a kind of a very question over there. But one of the things that I observe a lot is this kind of just the burnout under the security personnel. Right, as we know that there's a huge shortage of security people, right? And if you cannot kind of build the security culture right over there, right, lots of people will leave the company just because there's no kind of strong security culture, right? And we don't see the kind of just the long-lived security teams. The remarkable thing about the organizations with strong security culture is their ability to retain their security staff. And how you do this, kind of just acknowledge that the good things that people are doing over there, right? Just the rewarding the security attitudes for the people, so that, and also reflecting this one to the formal performance management process. This is a kind of just a huge thing. Unfortunately, not many organizations are doing this, Altaz.
Yeah. So you've brought in a change management aspect to this, right? This isn't just about the program, but there's a change aspect. How do we bring people along with us? And if there isn't, for example, examples from leadership, then what good is this? After all, does it even matter? Some of these things have to kind of be in play as well. Real quick, Spencer, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was going to kind of pivot on what Ayhan was saying, that it like culture fit is a big thing. And so being able to hire and being able to keep talent that adheres to your culture is very challenging too, because, as probably everybody knows, skill shortage, it's hard to find people that are really good at security, that are both technical, but then also have that right culture fit. Yeah. So finding that perfect storm, that's really hard. And so you can quickly do major damage by having the wrong person in the wrong team, the wrong kind of mentality or interactions between personnel, because culture is great. It's the overarching kind of concept, but people also help affect the actions that culture is driving. So if you have the wrong person in the wrong place, that can unravel too. So being extremely aware from a personnel management perspective, it's really important.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think with that, we're probably going to have to come into a land at this point. So Raquel, over to you to kind of sign us off.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you once again, Spencer, John, Ayhan, and Altaz. That was a great session. Just let everyone know, this is our last webinar of 2020. So thank you so much for attending. And if you have joined us during these sessions throughout the year, thank you so much for coming back. All of our 2021 webinars, as they begin scheduling, will be added to the resources section of our website. So please visit there soon to register. We hope everyone found this presentation insightful. And again, we'll be providing a link to this recording. Thank you so much for attending. Stay safe and enjoy your holidays.